Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Well, the topic we have to discuss today is quite interesting and very practical. However, when we talk about philosophy nowadays, every time we approach a word, as we say, words that have become very empty, we must first have the. It is important to clarify what we are talking about. Because if we were to strictly follow the philosophical criteria, I would have to tell you, in a very concise way, that I could end this lecture in 1 minute. Why don't we fulfill our dreams? Because we don't have them. That's it. Have a good day. If we truly consider what dreams are, in general, we have very few. So, the first thing we need to do is to better understand the use of words. Plato, a philosopher we often discuss here at the school, used to say that when a person is careless with words, they undermine one of the most important arts there is, the transmission of knowledge. And today, we practice this to exhaustion. Words are empty, they are. Words are used just to get by with each other. We don't really know what they mean, nor do we care much to find out. This is a curious thing. So, the first thing is to define what dreams are. Because, from the moment we define them, we can begin to recognize what we have truly accomplished. Today, when we say that someone is a dreamer, there is a connotation behind it. Actually, there are two. The first is the one that usually comes to mind. She is a fantastic person. She lives, as people commonly say, with her head in the clouds. She is a dreamer, with that attitude of always having her head in the clouds, in a way that is not very practical. Well, to begin with, that is not a dream, that is a fantasy. There is a fundamental difference between a dream and a fantasy. A dream is a vision that seeks to be brought to life at some point. A dream works with imagination. Imagination. It is projected to one day be born in our lives, to generate a new reality for us. Fantasy, on the other hand, fulfills itself. A person finds fulfillment on the level of imagination as a way to compensate for their frustration at not being able to accomplish what they would like to do. Not being able to, or not wanting to, or not having the willingness to do so. I often tell my students that ours is a society that practices and encourages collective evasion. Collective evasion into the realm of fantasy. Since life, in general, is very frustrating, people are almost driven to work out their frustrations on the plane of fantasy. You can see that one of the strongest elements in our current society is the tendency toward inertia, the law of least effort. So, it is much easier, instead of dedicating myself, for example, if I dream of being a great dancer, or if I dream of being a great musician, that takes work. Anything you want to do that is great. Great, good, it requires perseverance, consistency, rhythm, and commitment, which sometimes we lack. So, it is much easier for me if I just close my eyes and imagine myself as a concert artist, with people giving me a standing ovation. That brings me a level of satisfaction, and sometimes I stop there and feel fulfilled just by that. And this is something that today is strongly encouraged collectively. Because ours is a society that often sees self-expression as a way to compensate for the frustrations it generally carries. I often tell my students on Saturdays that this is connected to the very roots of our society. It sets a standard. A standard of happiness. Consider this. Take a moment to reflect on these philosophers of the world who live upon the earth. In general, what we see today, and it is quite globalized, is a project of happiness, an ideal of happiness that is highly consumerist, isn't it? A standard of consumption, of comfort, of luxury, and we know that if we were to bring all of humanity, 6 billion human beings, to this level of consumption, we wouldn't have a planet left for another decade. In other words, it wouldn't even be technically possible. So, we'll see a standard of happiness that people are unable to reach. In practice, this generates a collective frustration, and in some way, this frustration needs to be compensated for. So, people tend to escape into the realm of fantasy. And this fantasy is institutionalized through cultural products, where a person lives as the character from a soap opera, or as a participant in Big Brother, or whatever it may be, with such vividness, as if it were real, with an emotional intensity as if it were something truly real. Therefore, dreams have nothing to do with fantasy. Fantasy, at no point, intends to project itself into reality. A dream is a project that, at some point, tends to be put into practice. So, this is the first thing we need to define. And then, Lady Jayla truly fears dreams. There is also another element to clarify for her. What are dreams really, and what is their difference in relation to projects? This is a philosophically very important distinction. The two complement each other, but they are very different. When you ask, try this experiment. Ask half a dozen people. It can be a simple survey. What are your dreams? What do you think you will generally hear? Oh, my dream is to go to Europe. My dream is to buy a car of a certain model. My dream is to take a course of a certain kind. Well, are these really dreams, or are they projects? Take a moment to reflect on this. A dream, by definition, philosophically speaking, is something that pertains to the realm of being, something that gives meaning to your entire life, not just a part of it. A project, on the other hand, relates more to the realm of having or doing, and it does not justify your whole life. It justifies only a part of it. For a while, it may motivate you, but it is far too little to give meaning to someone's entire life. Imagine if the dream of my life were to travel to Europe. And after I go, I'll live for what? What will be left for me? What will be my motivation in life? Clearly, that is not enough. That is a project. Projects can be good or bad, but they must always be framed within a greater horizon. A dream always relates to being. A dream always refers to those aspects I wish to refine, the rough edges I want to smooth out, so that I can become what I'm and simply be. The final product of a human life is always the person themselves. And dreams and projects are part of this journey. Where do I want to go with all of this? What are the qualities I want to develop within myself? What are the aspects I want to smooth out or eliminate? This is a very curious thing. Perhaps some of you were present at that course we held during this time management week. I think some of you were there, right? It was one of the things I talked about. We are in a very favorable time this January to plan for the year ahead. Almost everyone does this. What I'll do this year. In general, people only focus on the project planning aspect. I'll save money, I'll change my car, maybe I'll renovate my apartment. But when it comes to our inner selves, we rarely make plans. For example, I'll work on smoothing out this rough edge that makes it hard for me to relate well with others. I'll try to better control my anger. I'll try to manage my bouts of bad mood. I'll try to work on my inner adversary. We don't make plans for our being, for who we are. Isn't that curious? Now, if you take a moment to reflect on the year that just ended, the year 2008, consider the things that brought you the most frustration and suffering. Was it the car you didn't replace, or was it your anger, your difficulties in getting along with others, or your bad mood, those things that end up stealing your peace? Opportunities for growth in life are found in the realm of being, not in having. Did your old car really bother you that much? Did the fact that your apartment wasn't painted trouble you so deeply, to the point of causing real suffering? On the other hand, the lack of control over your emotional states caused you much greater discomfort. Certainly. So, the main source of the problems you face depended on your ability to master yourself. Back in 2009, we did not try, nor did we plan, to address this aspect. We focused only on the aspect of projects. Projects can indeed be valuable, and generally, the response is positive. However, when they are confined within a certain framework, a project alone is not enough to justify human life. So, we would find ourselves trying to define who we are, who truly understands dreams. And this is what I was telling you all at the very beginning. In most cases, I would say, why don't we fulfill our dreams? Because we don't have them. We don't have projects. And this is something that becomes intertwined, one thing tied to the other. Because you could then rephrase the question and ask me, why didn't I accomplish my goal of getting a new car? Why didn't I achieve my goal of being promoted at work? Why didn't I accomplish my goal of traveling to Europe? And they'll tell you, perhaps it's because you don't take action. You become very ineffective at achieving your goals when you don't have dreams, because if you weren't promoted, it was probably due to a lack of organization, a lack of discipline. Why weren't you able to trade in your car? Perhaps it was because you lacked the self-control needed to save resources. This belongs to the realm of dreams, and you didn't have it. Do you understand? Therefore, you didn't achieve it. You were missing the essential fuel upon which projects move forward. Because one thing is not necessarily tied to the other. In general, a person is effective in accomplishing projects when they have dreams and make them a priority, because every time you develop yourself as a human being, as the biblical phrase says, everything else, seriousness, purity, grows as well. If not, it doesn't. So, this is a very clear equation. Why don't we accomplish our projects, which, in general, is what we have? Because we don't have them. Because we relegate this aspect as if it would be resolved by time, or perhaps by circumstances, or anything else that we ourselves do not shape. No one else can fulfill our dreams. And without them, many of our projects would also become unfeasible. But the worst part is not even that. Our very lives become stagnant. A human being's progress in life is measured by their dreams. Projects are a consequence. So, you are a very, very important hero. Today, I have something interesting that I prepared here to share with you. We might say, well, but there are people who accomplish great projects, like major entrepreneurs who do amazing things, who manage to lead large companies. Do these people have a dream? Well, I don't know. I would have to ask them. But there is something we can observe within society. Today, in general, depending on our cultural context, either a person is born with certain human potentials, or they simply will not have them. Because the process of education, the process of our culture, does not encourage or support this development. Let go. No one asks you to be more just, more balanced, more sober, or to have greater self-control. What is asked of you is to work more, to achieve greater success, to acquire more material resources. So, ours is not a society that prioritizes dreams or the cultivation of the inner self. Therefore, when someone accomplishes great projects, perhaps from the very beginning they already possessed certain virtues, were organized, and had a certain capacity for vision and imagination. Our society does not cultivate these elements. This is something important for you to recognize. We have an entire set of educational elements that, from childhood, have taught us to manage, for example, our physical body. From a very young age, isn't that right? We learn to sit, then we learn to walk. That was a challenge for a child. It seems absurd for someone to topple over on those wobbly legs. Crawling is so much easier. We learn, and then we learn to handle that pencil, that pen, and to write. These are achievements that, at first, seem impossible, but we master them. In other words, physically, we conquer the world of childhood. But, in general, our mastery of these elements stops there. We do not learn how to deal with our emotions. We do not learn how to manage our minds. Truly, to realize our dreams, we must enter this realm. So, when someone today accomplishes great projects, I find myself wondering, either they created a plan that allowed them to develop their dreams apart from society, or they already possessed that virtue from the start. One thing is certain, our educational process does not do much to encourage personal development. This is not considered very necessary. That is something interesting to observe. Isn't that so? So, there are a few elements I would like to share with you. Well, if we are talking about dreams, truly, about what we want to become, about what we hope to achieve as human beings, because, as I mentioned, projects will come as a result, what are truly the elements that prevent us from realizing them? What are the factors? Now, let's clearly define what we are talking about. Dreams, what we want to become, the mastery we wish to have over ourselves, the state of balance we aspire to reach. What truly prevents us from achieving this? I have separated this for you. 4 areas, so that we can visualize them more clearly, even though all 4 are interconnected. And, in the end, you might tell me it's all the same thing, because it all comes from a single human being. But, in general, we can see the obstacles more clearly when we look at 4 areas. Our relationship with time and our relationship with space, our relationship with others, that thing we call coexistence, which is one of the most complex challenges we face, and our relationship with ourselves. These 4 points, these 4 topics, are where most of the problems that make us ineffective in achieving our dreams are born. And, consequently, they also hinder our projects. Let's begin with our relationship with time. For those who attended the time management lecture this week, we talked a lot about this subject. Our relationship with time is extremely short-term. Our planning usually consists of what I'll do today, what I'll do this week, and at most, what I'll do this year. We do not have long-term planning. We do not set goals. We do not know what we want to become. This greatly clouds our discernment. I always say, especially in the geography course where we discuss this a lot, imagine if you were going to build a house. What would be the first step you would take? You would hire an architect who would design the blueprint for this house. And from the moment you hire the architect, the engineer, the construction supervisor, and set up the construction site, every day when the builder arrives for work, he will look at that blueprint, right? To know what to do today, he will look toward the future. He will look at the final goal, at where he wants to arrive with the project. He has a final objective. Do we have that? Do we know exactly where we want to go with all of this, or are we just putting out fires as they come? What is our greatest expectation for the end result? When we envision the future, do we think about the future that will unfold until it arrives? Let's be honest. I often joke with my students that, in general, our greatest expectation for the future is the end of the year because of the holidays. Isn't that right? But, in general, we think about today, this month, this week, not much further than that. Where do we want to go with all of this? How do I frame my day today? Because otherwise, you'll notice that we do something rather curious. We have actions that are contradictory. What we do in one cycle cancels out what we do in another. And the final sum of our attitudes is a great inefficacy. Do we want to serve contradictory things? We do not know exactly where we want to go. And in the end, these things end up generating, ultimately, a phenomenal inefficacy. From the moment I know where I want to go, when I can clearly visualize what I want to become at the end of all this, well, then I can know what is appropriate for today. So, it is a great act of boldness to dream about what we want to become. We know, in relation to this, what the proper attitudes for today are. Otherwise, as I mentioned on Wednesday, we play at being Penelope. We weave a tapestry during the day, and at night, we go and unravel it. There is a contradictory attitude. Do you notice that sometimes we have certain dreams of our own, things we want to achieve, things we want to accomplish, that do not align with the expectations that society has for us? And that these two things are disparate, leading in different directions, and that we'll see, sometimes, attend to both at the same time. Have you ever noticed that? We want, in a way, to serve two masters at the same time, as the biblical story says. In fact, the Quran gives an example about this, saying that it is like trying to ride two camels at the same time, which must not be easy at all. Isn't that right? If you consider the image you have of yourself, where do you want your life to go? I want to be a wise and balanced person, in control of myself, with a clear conscience from having given my best throughout life, from having been a positive influence in the lives of everyone I have encountered. Ultimately, that is who I want to be. And then society tells you otherwise. You have to be a highly successful person, someone with influence, with status, surrounded by others, someone who is envied, who has a certain standard of consumption and possessions. Someone who can do whatever they want, that is the standard of success you are given. Then you look and wonder, well, what I'll do, is it this way, or is it that way? And you try to do both. But there is a law of physics that says a body cannot be in two places at the same time. That's this small, inconvenient truth. If I, as an Indian, tried to do that, I would say, goodness is not found in this. And you have to clearly define, well, what will be my choice, my direction? And not try to serve incompatible things. Because, in the end, these things cancel each other out. I sometimes get the impression that people avoid this reflection as a form of escape, because they would have to accept, to deny certain things and affirm others. And they want to play a game where they try to satisfy everything. But these things are incompatible and end up canceling each other out, and you end up being mediocre in both worlds. Both in being and in having. You end up being mediocre in both worlds. Well, before moving in any direction, at least have the experience. But choose, clearly visualize what you want to be. There is a phrase from a philosopher called Vita, who says, the seeds of greatness in a person need an image in order to germinate and flourish. Have a clear image of what you want. Visualize it. The human imagination is very powerful. Have a clear image of what you want to be and move toward it. This is the first element. From the moment you have this goal, you can begin to plan the steps that will lead you there. Well, if I'm someone whose goal is to become a certain thing, in 1 year, what should I have achieved by then? In 1 month, as of today, this gives me an assessment of how I am managing my life. If we let time pass, management and planning are also fundamental. If we let time slip by, even if we have a goal, if we do not periodically evaluate whether we are moving toward it, we may take so many steps in the opposite direction that a certain point comes when it is no longer worthwhile. So, set a goal. I want to become this. Manage this goal daily in your life. Ask yourself, today, did I take a step toward that? Or did I remain stagnant? Or did I take a step in the opposite direction? Because one step can be reversed tomorrow, but what if there are many? What if I have taken a long stretch in the opposite direction of my dreams? It may be that it is no longer worth pursuing them. Have you ever noticed people, at a certain age in life, saying, I did everything wrong, but now I've done so much that I can't go back anymore? I've walked so far in this direction that now there's no point in turning back. In other words, it is a psychological phenomenon of inertia. If you let your life become too loose, too inattentive to your ideals, your projects, your dreams, it may be that you drift so far from them that there is no longer time or energy to return. Therefore, when it comes to time, these two elements are fundamental. Where to and how. A daily assessment. If I'm having moral strength, if I'm having discipline, if that's where I'm going, even if I'm going. A daily evaluation. Because from there, you begin to create a strategy. Well, if I'm moving forward, what is it that is pulling me away from this? What are the elements that lead me in the opposite direction of my dream? How can I resist these elements? Bring awareness into your time and manage it wisely. And know whether you are moving toward your dreams or not, and understand why. In such a way that, when something repeatedly pulls you away from the direction of your dreams, you begin to notice. Well, every time I pass by this car, it takes me away from my dreams. I will pass by with my intention renewed. And then you start to create a life strategy that allows you to be increasingly true to yourself. You will see that many philosophical traditions say that this dream of yours, this thing you desire in life, to be, is your true identity. That is your full name. It is your true identity. So, every time you betray this, you are betraying yourself. And you need to start observing which factors are stealing you away from yourself. This clear vision, this well-defined life plan, allows us to detect these things. So, the first element would be this relationship with time. The other is the relationship with space. The relationship with space involves a fundamental virtue, which is organization. But it's not just physical organization, though that is also important. It's about physical, psychic, and mental organization. So that we can truly manage our space well, and our mind and emotions, which are also spaces, we need to know how to put each thing in its proper place. To bring fresh air into these areas, to have a certain mastery, to maintain a certain order. On the physical level, I don't need to explain this. Anyone who has ever tried to accomplish even a simple project knows how complicated things become when you are surrounded by chaos. Isn't that right? How much efficiency you lose, how much you lose your focus when you can't gather the necessary resources. It's obvious. Now, we don't realize that the same rules apply to the mental and emotional planes. That it is possible to organize them. And we struggle more in these areas than we do in the physical realm. Why is that? At some point in your life, someone has told you that you can organize your closet. But has anyone ever told you, at any point in your life, that you can organize your thoughts? But no one ever told us that you could organize your emotions or your thoughts. We live in a culture that says these things are random, and that you can't do anything about them. That you have no control over them. That you cannot achieve emotional stability so that, when you set out to dedicate yourself to something, you don't end up oscillating between states of euphoria and depression that distract you. That you can achieve a mental stability so that, when you want to focus on something, intrusive thoughts don't keep spinning in your mind. We don't realize that we can organize both our mental and emotional realms. And this is an interesting point. Like I mentioned to you, we are only taught to manage our physical body. And if you think about it, learning to manage the physical body has already given us great efficiency. We learned how to sit, to walk, to write. How many things have we been able to achieve because of this? And what if we had also learned to manage our emotions and our thoughts? As we often say in our course, managing my legs means going wherever I want. And what if I were able, just as I tell my legs, take me here, I were able to say to my thoughts, focus on this concept here. Emotions, calm and serene, so that I may have the clarity to concentrate. And yet, they do not obey. Can you imagine the efficiency of a person like this? The ability to bring things to fruition? In other words, for any endeavor you set out to accomplish, one of the fundamental elements is mastery over the tools you will use. And your thoughts and your feelings are tools. The level of imbalance, instability, and lack of mastery we have over this aspect of ourselves are the main factors behind failure, especially nowadays. As I mentioned to you at the beginning, lack of concentration, distraction, the tendency toward negative mental patterns that drain us and sap all our mental energy, and emotional instability. Do you know anyone who is in a state of euphoria or depression? Or anything similar that is effective? Can you imagine Leonardo da Vinci painting the Mona Lisa while euphoric or depressed? Does anyone create something of quality in these altered emotional states? Or with circular thinking, Michelangelo sculpting the Pieta while obsessively ruminating? Of course not. He was completely focused on his work. We were not told that we can manage our thoughts and feelings just as we manage our legs when we walk. And that this follows more or less the same principle. In the same way that we need discipline if we set out to organize our closet, we must have discipline if we intend to organize our thoughts and our feelings. And it is not possible to do one without doing the other. This is an element that we also study within the philosophy course. This same principle that I just mentioned to you, which is biblical, you cannot serve two masters at the same time. Do you think it is possible to organize your closet, organize your thoughts, and not organize your closet? Does that really work? This is an important element that you have forgotten. In general, our psyche tends to obey a single law, a single principle. When you say, I do not allow myself to live with disorder, you establish a principle of life, a philosophy of life. You place a sentinel within yourself. When disorder enters any area, an alarm will sound. Hey, look, there's disorder. And you have to respond. And if you let that disorder go by and remain passive, it will spread into every area, and you will lose your sense of order. Do you understand this? So, if I walk past my closet and it's chaotic and I don't react, well, chaos will enter my mental space, chaos will enter my emotional space, and they'll feel it, because you have to establish a single law, otherwise you won't have that law in any area of your life. So, this ability to bring order, and for this, nowadays, we are very little trained. There is the possibility of engaging in a discipline that allows us to achieve a greater balance between the mind and the emotions. The ability to have control over your mental, emotional, and physical tools, in other words, your relationship with space, is fundamental for someone to shape their own being. Fundamental. I do not know of any great person who has accomplished great things who was not deeply focused on what they intended to do. A strict discipline, a refined mastery over oneself. This brings efficiency. It opens the way forward. There is a myth, which is the Odyssey, that you must be familiar with, where, when Odysseus returns home to reclaim his land with his own strength, he finds it blocked, full of suitors. Have you heard this story before? He challenges the suitors while disguised as an old man. He challenges the suitors to take up Ulysses' bow, which was actually his own, though they did not know this, and shoot an arrow that would pass through several holes and reach a target at the end. Well, the bow itself was enormous. It was not easy to bend, especially if you have to shoot that arrow through all those holes to reach a target. That was something beyond impossible. And, in the end, truly, only he succeeded. In general, these myths are all symbolic. They refer to life. The ability to bend the bow means knowing how to bend all the elements of our personality, that is, our physical energy, our emotions, our thoughts, our will. I want this. And I bend all these elements before my will. But for you to be effective, You need all the holes to be aligned. You need order. Because even if you manage to bend your personality, if you lack order, that arrow will glance off one of those holes and never reach its target. In other words, you will need self-mastery, discipline, but you also need order to achieve your goal. All the holes must be aligned in the same direction. So, this is an element that involves dealing with space. Another, which is very important, is dealing with others. This is fundamental, as it concerns the matter of coexistence. So, I was telling you all. The main frustrations, the main problems, the main dissatisfactions we experienced over the past year. We are in a good moment to reflect on this. We are still close to it, we haven't completely forgotten. Soon, we won't remember anything at all. But for now, we are still close. We remember 2008. Understand clearly how the biggest source of frustration is inserted. For us, aren't most problems related to living together? That's how it is, isn't it? Now, at this level of not knowing how to fit in, not knowing how to coexist with others, look, it is very difficult for anyone to achieve a dream or a project in a completely autonomous way, without having to rely on anyone. Totally isolated and in spite of the world. It is much easier to work with the world on your side than against it. Isn't that right? It is much easier to work with people when they join in your dreams and support you, rather than the opposite. Knowing how to establish harmonious coexistence is fundamental. Knowing how to do this. Building bonds with the people around us greatly amplifies our potential. There is a story that I find very beautiful, very interesting. There was a general who was undefeated in all his battles, always victorious. And one day, a king from another kingdom decided to send an officer to accompany that general to war. Because, after all, someone had to go there and find out what this man's secret was. How does he always win? He must have some kind of tip. So he sends an officer to accompany this general to a war. And so this foreign officer begins to accompany the general, who was setting out on a military campaign. At a certain moment, imagine this, all the troops marching toward the place where the battle was set to take place. Suddenly, the general stops everything when he sees some peasants planting in the fields. He says, "Stop," gets off his horse, and goes to talk with the peasants. They are marching to war. He sits down, talks with the peasants, eats with them, and spends the whole day there. The officer, completely bewildered, did not understand any of it. The entire army was camped, waiting while he spoke with the peasants. Then, afterward, he mounts his horse again and continues on his way. A couple of days later, he comes across some builders who were constructing a bridge. He stops everything once more. He goes to talk with the builders. And yes, he truly engages in conversation. He speaks with them, eats with them, visits their homes. This costs another 2 days. The officer is still completely bewildered. But what is this? Are we marching because of an old woman? Is this some kind of social gathering? What is going on here? He just cannot understand any of it. And so, they continue marching toward war. Until a certain moment arrives when the officer can no longer contain his curiosity. They arrive at the battlefield and he finally speaks up. "But, General, does any of this make sense? We are marching toward a battlefield. You stop to talk with the farmer, you stop to talk with the bridge builder, you stop to talk with everyone. What is the meaning of this? He is doing this." He says, "Look, this is strategy. There is nothing more effective than building relationships, forging bonds. This war will not be a conflict that ends quickly. It will certainly be prolonged, because the enemy is powerful. We'll need supplies. I am certain that if I send you to speak with those peasants, telling them in my name that I need supplies, they will send them to me. Perhaps we will have to pursue the enemy, and this region is complicated, full of rivers. I am sure that if you call upon these builders in my name, they will come." In other words, he weaves a network of relationships that supports his dreams and projects, a network upon which he relies to propel himself into the future. In fact, it is interesting that one of the etymologies of the word future itself is related to relationships. You build your future not alone, because we are social beings and we need one another. Each one empowering the others to an even greater degree. So, finding a way for coexistence to become harmonious, which in itself could be the subject of an entire lecture, is also fundamental. It is important to understand why certain people bother me so much, why I am able to get along with some individuals who have serious flaws without being disturbed, while others trouble me so deeply that I am unable to coexist with them. Why is that? Why is it that living with certain people is unbearable for me? To question ourselves about this, what is it that makes certain flaws intolerable to us? In general, as our friend Jung used to say, there is a phenomenon of projection at play. We cannot stand to see outside of ourselves that which we do not have control over, and we often witness this phenomenon of displacement. And when you have mastery over a flaw and someone else displays it, you feel compassion, not intolerance. But when you do not have mastery over a flaw and it appears before you, it unsettles you. It is as if you are being forced to look at something you do not want to see, something you are not willing to address. At that moment, imagine that I have a problem, let's say, laziness. And all the philosophical traditions throughout history have spoken about this. The universe is not chaos, it is cosmos. There is a harmony of roles. So, when we'll see grow, we attract to ourselves those elements, those situations, those people who embody exactly the aspect we need to see in order to grow. It is our personal power that makes this happen. So, I want to grow, but there is a serious element, I'm lazy. But I'm willing to face it, or not. Do I feel prepared to face it, or not? Do I want to work on it? What is the most likely scenario in your life? That a person with this same trait appears, someone very lazy, and enters your circle of relationships in such a way that you have no way to escape from them? Or you establish a business relationship with someone who is extremely inert, or this person comes to work with you, something like this enters your life. This will bother you in a terrible way if you had just swept your own laziness under the rug. And then it appears before you, live and in color, and there is no way for you to avoid it. This is going to be tremendously uncomfortable. Notice that when things are negative, they sometimes require us to take a stand, but there is no reason for them to throw us off balance. If they do throw us off balance, it is generally because they are symbolic. They are trying to tell us something. Because if someone commits an offense and it is my role to judge, I can be absolutely just with that person without losing my center. If I lose my center, if this irritates me, if this becomes intolerable for me, poor me, observe. This has affected you in some way. Every time something throws you off balance, that thing has gotten to you. And this element, I'm trying to tell you something. I would like to ask you, what is behind it? I would like you to introduce yourself, because life is trying to speak to you through your companions in coexistence. Because there is probably a lesson there that will allow you to gain great self-knowledge. Once you become aware of this element, integrate it, and master it, you will develop compassion for those who struggle against it. Because you will understand the price that comes with fighting against it. Therefore, you will even feel a certain compassion for those who are being defeated by it, because you know how hard the struggle is. Once you have integrated it, you are capable of dealing with it outwardly, and dealing with it does not mean always being nice or sentimental. It means being just, doing what is necessary. Do not think otherwise. One of the greatest misconceptions we have in society is believing that, in order to be just, you must be angry. A person who is angry is not in a position to judge. Justice requires clarity of mind. And when you are firm with someone, it is because that person needs it as an educational element, not because you are unloading your own frustrations onto them. A person who is out of balance, therefore, is someone who is not loyal to others, who does not allow themselves to act from their center. Because from there arises this fundamental element, to question what I need to correct so that my relationships can become harmonious. After all, our greatest source of suffering is the loss of energy and effectiveness, because we are unable to accomplish anything together. And what can we achieve alone? We are unable to carry out a project collectively. How can we accomplish anything by ourselves? That is not in our nature, as you know. Without relying on anyone, no one speaks of the complete process. And finally, there is an element that is very important, the relationship with oneself. This is another factor that we often neglect. A capacity. This is an element that would require us to work through several factors for you to fully understand the concept, which is character. A capacity to shape our own character. What is character, philosophically speaking? Plato, as he often said in his laws, expressed this very clearly, that human beings have a natural tendency to like certain things and to reject others. And that, in a just state, this would have to be shaped in such a way that one would come to appreciate the things that allow for growth and reject those that hinder it. If only one had a clear vision of what leads to growth as a human being and what drags one down to an animalistic condition, and if one could naturally learn to appreciate what is good and reject what is harmful. We do not have this in our current society. Our character, in general, is very poorly formed, to such an extent that you can clearly perceive a certain laxity. There are many things we recognize intellectually as being good for us, but we are unable to do them because we do not like them. There is a significant difference between what we like and what is actually good for us. And there is also a great difference between what we reject and what is truly harmful to us. This gap hinders us greatly. Because how can I shape my dreams? If I realize that what I want to be is not aligned with what I truly need to become, there are a series of steps that must be taken, and many of them are not pleasant for me, things I do not enjoy. For example, as we discussed earlier, I need to work on living together harmoniously. Well, this will involve going through several stages where I will have to adopt certain behaviors that will not be enjoyable. And if I do not have the ability to realize that my preferences are not my true essence, I'm my preferences. My preferences are shaped by society and can be changed. If they do not fulfill me, if they do not lead me where I want to go, they can be changed. They are flexible. I can rebuild my character. I can learn to appreciate what is truly good for me. If we do not have a clear understanding of this, it will not be very difficult. We become slaves to our likes and dislikes. Wanting and not wanting. This is an element that is important to recognize. So, I can reshape myself, rebuild myself through a connection. Is it possible to do this? It may seem a bit surprising to you, but it is possible. Everything you like today, take a moment to reflect on that. What do you like? What do you think? What has truly been your own choice? Have you ever stopped to consider that even our thoughts have this characteristic, that very few of them are actually our own? This is quite an interesting thing. If we stop to question our thoughts and ask, why do I think this? What practical life experience did I have that led me to form this mindset? You will realize that it doesn't exist. I have not lived through anything that would justify holding that opinion. I absorbed it from my environment. We take on a ready-made package of life and absorb this software from our surroundings. And much of it, most things, in fact, are not truly ours. Many of our thoughts are not our own. And what about our pleasures and our negative reactions? Aren't they closely tied to the products of our society, which rejects certain things and favors others? And when you really look at it, you realize you are being chosen, you are being thought, you are being lived. And there is very little room for choice. Almost nothing truly belongs to us. So, can I rebuild all of this? Yes, I can. Can I learn, through a process of discipline, to appreciate what I understand to be good? To reject what I perceive as harmful, in such a way that, as the word itself suggests, I begin to gain ever greater mastery over these tools, our whims, our emotions, which often render things unfeasible simply because they lack energy. Usually, it goes like this: I don't like it, I have no motivation to do it. And I don't get up from my chair, and it becomes as if it were something undesirable, as if my preferences were part of something very transcendent that I was born with. That's not true. If you had been born in a different family context, in another country, your preferences would be different. That is not who you are. That was shaped by the world. Well, reshape yourself. If your personality must be shaped by the world, then at least let it be shaped by you and in the direction you desire. Otherwise, it may end up serving an interest that has nothing to do with what you truly believe in. So, this ability to reconstruct our affinities, to reconstruct our rejections, will enhance our capacity to master our own lives. And, without a doubt, this will give you much greater effectiveness on the island of our lives. Another thing that is important, perhaps you find it strange that I talk about this, is that feeling, according to Immanuel Kant, is one of man's noblest feelings. Respect. Kant said that respect comes from respicere, which means to know how to see. What does that mean? To know how to see what? In general, in this society, we have a habit, we know things, and then we return to distraction. Because people like it, because people will think something of us, this is what is commonly called, for show, just for appearances. Isn't that so? Usually, we lose a lot of motivation when we are not being observed. There is a philosophical maxim that says, "You are what you do when the last door closes behind you." So, we are often highly motivated by an external observer. Have you ever heard of Plato's myth of Gyges, the ring of Gyges? Gyges was a great shepherd, and it is said that he was highly virtuous. Until, one fine day, Gyges found a ring, and when he put it on his finger, he became invisible. And just like that, Gyges' virtue was gone. He began to steal, to plunder, to harass women, he killed the king, and seduced the queen. His virtue was gone. Was he virtuous? He was virtuous only as a facade. Internally, he had no deep connection with anyone. This is something interesting, because we often lack an inner dialogue that allows us to refrain from certain actions not for the sake of others, but for ourselves. That is respect, to recognize that within myself there is something that deserves respect. And to refrain from doing things that I myself do not deserve. Imagine a person who does not respect themselves, who lacks a certain inner life, that certain something, Pedro, that dignity provides. How could such a person be effective in achieving great dreams? Can you imagine any person without self-respect being capable of accomplishing great things? This is the matter of inner life, which is one of the fundamental elements we must take into consideration. In other words, to respect my silent inner observer, who does not deserve to be exposed to certain situations. To respect that there is someone noble, divine, within me who does not deserve to be relegated to certain circumstances. There is a Zen story, which most of my students have already heard more than 10 times. It is very interesting and worth mentioning here. It tells of a monastery that was falling apart, very old, crumbling, and the monks there were mendicants and had no way to repair the monastery. So they went to speak with their master to ask what they should do. "Well, master, what are we going to do? Master, the monastery is falling apart." The master, who is meditating, pauses, looks, and says, "Yes, indeed, it is falling apart. If we don't do something, it will be lost to us. But we have no resources. How are we going to do it?" Then he takes advantage of the situation to test the disciple and give him a challenge. And he says, "Look, I see only one way for you to obtain the resources we need. You know that village that's nearby?" "Yes." "Go there and steal as much as you can. Steal, really steal, take everything you can and bring it back to us. When he has resources, he will form a gang. Everyone there is wicked, not like you are. Steal, steal. But now, there's just one detail. Do not steal if someone is watching you, because something important is at stake. The reputation of the group, a respectability built over centuries. So, if anyone is watching you, do not steal. Do you understand?" They were left somewhat perplexed. "So, what should we do? Has the master lost his mind? But what if he's wrong? Monasteries falling apart, but stealing may be justified by a Machiavellian cause. That's how we justify things, after all. Zen Machiavelli. Anyway. Let's go, well. The master gave the order, let's do it. And off they went to the city. Let's go, we're being robbed. Then the master calmly stands up, enters the monastery, and when he goes inside, there is a disciple, a head of household, sitting there peacefully. He was there meditating. The master looks at the disciple. "What are you doing, young man?" "What do you mean, I'm doing, master?" "I'm doing what you told me to do." "What did I tell you to do?" "You told me to steal." "Yes, but you told me to steal. Even if no one else is watching me, I'm watching myself all the time. How could I possibly steal?" Do you understand? I have an observer within me, who deserves respect, who cannot witness just anything. I'll lower him to the indignity of witnessing a foolish act. He does not deserve that. There is life within me. I'm just a vessel, a fragile one, and this life, above all, deserves respect, because if not, how could I ever respect any other life? This is also a fundamental element for anyone who wishes to fulfill their dreams. Inner life, self-respect, dignity. All these elements, which today are seen as so theoretical, considered so unnecessary, are actually essential for anyone who aspires to a successful career. Ultimately, This is a fundamental element, respect for oneself. Inner life, there is someone within me who deserves respect. Dignity, this sense of honor, which is so rare today. And finally, the last element, which is fundamental and very interesting, is what gives a person great effectiveness. It is when your dreams align with the dreams of nature. You realize that we are not living in a blind, dead, meaningless, or lifeless universe. We are part of a universe that moves in a certain direction. Its very name tells us this. Versus and thuno, moving toward the one. It is moving toward something. There is an evolutionary purpose in nature. All philosophical traditions say this. There is an intelligence in this direction. It is what the Eastern tradition calls dharma. It is a law that leads all beings toward harmony. And nature has a purpose. It knows where it wants to go. It has its own dreams. When your dreams align with the dreams of nature, that is, when they are coherent with them, nature stamps your dreams and supports them. And it walks alongside you. You have the power of nature with you. This is what Hume called synchronicity. When a person creates synchronicity, when their dream moves in the same direction as the dream of nature, it walks with the Dharma. It walks with the law of the universe. Because then, your dreams matter to nature. It is not a selfish project meant only to satisfy you. It is something that benefits humanity. It is something that qualifies you to serve humanity. It is something that is coherent with the laws of the universe. Therefore, you have an extra force on your side, which is this synchronicity. It is this power of nature. I'll continue on my own. Nature endorses you and walks with you. It's as if all those elements that we can't quite explain, many people throughout history seem to have a power where everything just worked out for them. Have you ever heard these stories? It seems as if all of nature was on their side. Certainly, they were working on a project that was not merely personal. It was not something purely selfish. There was something more behind it. This gives a whole new power. This gives a whole new projection for your children. Isn't that right? When we work, it's as if nature turns to you and says, look, if it's a selfish project, you will go alone. But a dream that works for the good of humanity, nature opens the way for you. I recognize this and clear the path for you. Then you begin to set everything in motion. It seems as if all the factors align themselves to empower and bring to you exactly what you need at the very moment you need it. I always give a lecture. By the way, next month, I will speak about the philosophy of the sword points, where I discuss this very fact, specifically within the context of the sword points. The prince arrives there, and the king says to him, "Save my daughter, who is being held captive by an evil dragon on the high mountain of seven. The prince says, "I will." He acts in a profoundly altruistic manner. He does not know the princess. He has nothing to gain. He has no personal interests. He does not stop halfway and ask, "What I'll get out of this? What are you going to pay me?" There is no such thing. He acts for a cause that is entirely selfless. And, at first, it seems impossible, far beyond his own strength. He is a human being, and it is a dragon. But he commits himself to this mission. It is something generous, beneficial, and aligned with the laws of nature. He begins his journey. What happens next? As he sets himself in motion, things begin to happen. An old man appears, and he gives the old man some water. The old man gives him a cloak that makes him invisible. Have you ever read a fairy tale? How do these stories go? Today, those tales by the Brothers Grimm have this kind of idea. Then, a little bird comes and tells him a secret. Then he finds a sword, he takes it, and then they march on. He becomes equipped along the course of the story. When he first sets out, he is in no condition to confront a dragon. But when he reaches the other side, he has all the tools necessary to succeed. Because all of nature, being on his side, equips him along the way. He is armed as he journeys along the path. As his latent powers begin to emerge, he receives new tools. He is empowered throughout his journey. Why is that? Because his cause is venerable to certain principles of the soul. It is generous, altruistic, dignified, and just. Thus, it aligns with what Eastern tradition calls sadhana, the law of the universe, and moves in that direction. So, nature becomes sparing. Let me explain what I mean by that. How so? This is an even more fundamental element, one that certainly ensures our success when we respond to our universe. So, I have given you some elements for you to make a diagnosis. This is, in fact, a small exercise. You should observe. Are you not fulfilling your dreams? What is it, really, that is holding you back? Well, are they truly dreams? Yes, they are. How am I relating to time? Do I have goals? Do I know where I want to go? How am I relating to space? Do I know how to bring order to things? Am I reasonably at peace with my mental patterns and my emotions? Do I have serenity? Do I have balance? How am I relating to others? Or is it currently a troubled relationship where I live somewhat isolated, thinking that I'm a very special being and that people do not understand me? What does that mean? How do I relate to myself? Do I dedicate any time to my inner life? Do I dedicate any time to what is higher? Knowledge. All these elements must be part of how I shape my character. Because if we'll wait for society to shape our character, and I'll just sit and cry and blame society. No. If I do not receive it, can I still shape the human being myself? In fact, because if you don't do it, there's no way to pass it on. And there is this error in trying to do everything. At some point, someone who did not receive character formation must actually form it themselves. This will break the vicious cycle of not receiving and not giving. So, all these elements always ensure that I am not lacking, or that my projects are not selfish and do not work in favor of the laws of nature, which will still add an extra boost of energy that can allow me to move forward with greater ease. This is something universal, and in fact, this same philosopher, Immanuel Kant, whom I mentioned to you a moment ago, spoke about this. Do you want to test the morality of something? Do you want to know if something is universal? Think, if everyone had dreams like mine, would the world be a better place to live? Or would it be a more selfish, more materialistic place, where people live in a dream, an alienation of consumption, and everything remains the same? Then you will realize that your dreams are aligned with the interests of nature. Because if everyone dreamed as you do, and the world became better, your dreams are meaningful for nature. Therefore, you possess an energy. Check all these elements and see where the gap lies. Where are you losing energy? This is fundamental. Do this in your planning this year. Focus clearly on who you want to become. Notice that when you do not focus on who you want to be, you end up being influenced by society's models, which, in general, have nothing to do with what you plan, with what you dream, with what you want to become. When we leave gaps, nature does not allow a vacuum. It will be filled by something that, in general, is very contradictory to our principles, to what we truly want to become. Therefore, take hold of the rest of your life. See clearly who you want to be. Set goals within a timeline. Anchor these goals in real actions. Observe how you relate to the things around you. Reflect on how you relate to yourself. And see if this is consistent with the ways of nature. Then you will begin to notice where the obstacles are. And you must ensure that you do not allow these obstacles to prevent you from achieving your goals. Philosophically, this has always been the formula, simple and clear. It is a test of evaluation, because we do not manage to achieve our goals. Some element is not being properly managed within these four realms.